Long ago, in the dazzling land of Persia, the sun gleamed. On golden towers and silk flags danced in the wind. But behind the palace gates, a secret was hidden. A secret that could change everything. Could one quiet girl become the hero of a nation? The story begins with Esther, a humble young woman who never dreamed of being queen. As the palace doors swung open, her heart pounded. Trumpets sounded. The king was searching for a new queen, and Esther, chosen among many, tried to stay calm. She whispered a silent prayer, "God, help me to be brave." No one in the palace knew her biggest secret, that she was one of God's people, a Jew. The world glittered around her, but danger quietly waited beyond the throne. Days passed, and Esther's life changed forever. The king chose her, the quiet girl with gentle eyes, to wear the crown of Persia. The palace cheered. Trumpets roared and golden petals rained from the balconies. But inside, Esther's heart whispered a prayer. "Lord, help me remember who I am." Mordecai stood outside the gates, his eyes full of tears and pride. Yet he also felt a shiver of fear. "Do not tell anyone you are a Jew," he warned her softly. "It is not safe." Esther nodded. She knew her secret must stay hidden. Though the crown sparkled on her head, she felt the weight of something far greater, destiny. Every morning, Esther walked the grand marble halls, her silk gown brushing against the floor. Yet her thoughts stayed with her people outside. One afternoon, she heard whispers among the servants, angry voices speaking of Haman, the king's advisor. "He demands everyone bow to him," one servant muttered. But Mordecai refused. Esther froze. Her heart pounded. Mordecai had angered the most powerful man in the court. She hurried to her balcony and prayed, "God, protect my cousin." Below, she could see Haman's chariot rolling through the gates, his dark cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow. That night, Mordecai stood by the king's gate. Two guards whispered nearby, not knowing he was listening. "Tomorrow we strike the king while he sleeps," one hissed. Mordecai's eyes widened. He ran to warn Esther, sending a message through the servants. "Tell the queen there is danger." Esther read the note, her hands trembling. Without delay, she went to the king and told him what Mordecai had heard. The guards were caught, and the king's life was saved. That night, Mordecai's name was written in the royal book of records. Esther smiled softly as she whispered to the stars, "Thank you, God. You placed me here for a reason." But peace did not last. Days later, Haman stormed through the palace, his eyes burning with rage. "That man Mordecai refuses to bow," he thundered. His pride turned into hatred, and a dark plan began to grow. "Not just him," he sneered, "but all his people must be destroyed." Esther, hearing whispers of this wicked plan, felt her heart sink. Fear tried to take hold, but she remembered her cousin's words and the God who had always been with her. "Lord," she prayed softly, "show me what to do. I will not be afraid." The camera holds on her tearful eyes as the light of a single candle flickers beside her, small, but still shining. Morning sunlight spilled across the palace as whispers of fear swept through the city. Haman's messengers rode through the streets, shouting the king's new decree, that every Jew in Persia would be destroyed. Families trembled. Mordecai tore his robe and fell to his knees in grief. He prayed, "O Lord, have mercy." Then he sent a message to Esther. "You must go to the king. Beg him to save our people." Esther read the letter with shaking hands. Her heart pounded. To go before the king uninvited was against the law. Anyone who entered without being called could be put to death. She looked toward heaven. "God," she whispered, How can I be brave enough? Esther's servants found Mordecai weeping at the gate and hurried to tell her. She sent them food and clothes, but he refused. Tell her, Mordecai said, this is not the time to hide. You were made queen for this very moment. When Esther heard his words, tears filled her eyes. She walked to her mirror, staring at her reflection, a crown on her head, but fear in her heart. If I stay silent, she whispered, my people will perish. But if I go to the king, I might die. Then her voice grew stronger. But I must try. That night, Esther gathered her servants. For 3 days, she said gently, do not eat or drink. Pray for me, for courage, for wisdom. Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with faith. Across the city, Mordecai and the people did the same. Families knelt together under starlight, whispering prayers. The city grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. In the stillness, Esther felt a peace stronger than fear. She touched the window and whispered, if I perish, I perish. But I will do what is right. On the 3rd day, Esther rose at dawn. She put on her royal robes, the fabric shimmering like the morning sky. Every step toward the throne room felt heavier than the last. Guards bowed as she passed, but their eyes showed fear. No one dared enter the king's court uninvited. The giant doors creaked open and the sound echoed through the hall. The king looked up, surprised. Everyone froze. Esther took a breath and stepped forward. Would he be angry? Would she die? The king's eyes softened. Slowly, he lifted his golden scepter toward her. She had found favor in his sight. Esther bowed low, her heart bursting with relief. Relief, Queen Esther, the king said kindly. What is it you wish? Even half my kingdom, it shall be yours. Esther bowed, her voice calm but careful. If it please the king, she said, come today to a banquet I have prepared, and bring Haman. The king agreed. As they left, Haman's pride swelled. The queen herself invited me, he boasted. But Esther's eyes were thoughtful and steady. She had begun her plan, a plan born of faith. In her heart, she prayed again, Lord, guide me. The battle is yours. The camera pans to the palace courtyard where the wind stirs the banners. A storm is coming, but so is deliverance. That afternoon, the palace buzzed with excitement. Queen Esther had invited the king and Haman to a private banquet, a rare honor. Golden lamps flickered as servants filled crystal cups and spread fruit and honey on silver plates. Haman strutted beside the king, smiling proudly. But behind Esther's calm face, her heart raced. She had prayed for this moment. The king's eyes were kind as he said, "What is your request, my queen?" Esther hesitated. The time didn't feel right. "If it pleases the king," she said gently, "come again tomorrow, and bring Haman once more." The king agreed, pleased by her grace. Haman left that day boasting louder than ever, unaware that God was setting a perfect trap. That evening, Haman returned home, bursting with pride. "Even the queen invites only me," he boasted. But then his smile faded. As he passed the palace gate, he saw Mordecai standing tall, refusing to bow. Rage flooded him again. "I will not rest until he hangs from a gallows," he shouted. His family nodded fearfully. "Build a tall wooden gallows," they urged. "Then ask the king to hang Mordecai upon it." Haman's cruel grin returned. As the moon rose over the city, hammers echoed through the night, the sound of his wicked plan taking shape. But that same night, the king could not sleep. He paced the marble floor, his mind restless. "Bring me the royal records," he ordered. A servant opened a scroll and began to read. There was a man named Mordecai who once saved the king from a plot. The king frowned. "Has anything been done to honor him?" "Nothing, my lord," the servant replied. The king's eyes brightened. Then tomorrow he shall be rewarded. At that very moment, Haman was on his way to ask for Mordecai's death, not knowing God had already turned the story around. Just as dawn broke, Haman entered the court, ready to speak. But before he could open his mouth, the king smiled and said, "Haman, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman's pride leapt within him. "He should wear royal robes," he said eagerly, "ride the king's horse and be led through the city with praise." The king nodded. "Excellent. Go at once. Do all this for Mordecai the Jew." Haman froze. The color drained from his face. Still, he could not refuse. And so, humiliated and trembling, he led Mordecai through the streets, shouting words of honor he never wanted to say. That evening, Haman hurried home, covering his face in shame. His friends warned, "This is a bad sign. You cannot stand against a man protected by God." But before he could speak again, the king's servants arrived. "The queen's banquet is ready," they said. Haman wiped his face and followed, trying to hide his fear. In the palace, Esther waited calmly. She looked toward heaven and whispered, "The time has come." The soft music stopped. The golden lamps flickered. Tomorrow, her voice would change history forever. The next day dawned golden and still. Inside the palace, the banquet table sparkled with jewels and silver cups. Esther's heart thumped as she watched the king and Haman enter. Music floated softly, but her thoughts were louder. "Now, Lord, help me speak." The king smiled warmly. "My queen," he said, "what is your request? Even half my kingdom. It shall be yours." The room fell silent. Esther rose slowly, her hands trembling but her voice clear. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king," she said, "let my life be given me, and the lives of my people, for we have been sold to be destroyed." The king's smile vanished. His eyes burned with anger. "Who would dare do such a thing?" he thundered. Esther turned, her gaze steady. "Is this wicked Haman?" The room exploded with gasps. Haman's face twisted in fear. "My lord, please," he cried, falling to his knees. But the king's wrath was like a storm. "How dare you?" he roared, rising from his throne. Servants stepped back as his golden robe swirled behind him. Haman reached toward Esther, begging for mercy, but even his words sounded hollow. Esther stepped away, her eyes steady. She had done it. The truth was out. All her fear melted into peace, because she knew God had given her strength for this moment. As the king stormed out into the garden, Haman collapsed beside the queen's couch, crying, "Please spare my life." Just then, the king returned and saw Haman leaning toward Esther. "Will he even attack the queen in my own house?" he roared. Guards rushed forward, their armor clanking. One stepped up and said, "My lord, Haman built gallows at his home to hang Mordecai, who saved the king's life." The king's fury burned brighter. "Hang him there instead," he ordered. Justice had spoken. Before sunset, Haman's gallows stood empty no more. The very place built for Mordecai became Haman's end. Justice was done. But Esther knew her work was not finished. The king called her gently. "What more do you need, my queen?" he asked. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Let another decree be written, that my people may live." The king nodded and handed her his royal seal. "So it shall be," he said. For the first time, Esther smiled, a smile of victory, not for herself, but for all who had prayed in the shadows. That night, the stars over Persia seemed brighter than ever. Mordecai stood beside Esther on the palace balcony. The wind carried the soft sounds of laughter and song as families celebrated their deliverance. "God used you, my daughter," Mordecai said softly. Esther looked out at the glowing city and whispered, "It was never my power, only his." She held her crown, not with pride, but with gratitude. The same courage that once trembled in her heart now burned like a light for generations to come. And as the scene faded, her words echoed in the night. With God's help, even one voice can change history. At sunrise, the city of Susa awoke to the sound of galloping horses. Riders thundered through the streets, carrying new scrolls sealed with the king's royal mark. People gathered in amazement as messengers shouted, "A new decree from the king. The Jews are free to defend themselves." Joyful cries filled the air. Mordecai stood at the gate, now dressed in royal blue and white robes, a golden crown upon his head. The people cheered his name. What once began with fear now shone with hope. God had turned darkness into light, and his promise was alive in the hearts of his people. In every town, from the mountains to the valleys, the news spread like fire. Families who once hid in silence lifted their heads in joy. Mothers embraced their children, fathers wept with relief, and prayers of thanksgiving filled the air. The people remembered Esther's bravery and Mordecai's faith. "God never left us," they whispered. He was working all along. Across the empire, hearts were strengthened. Even those who did not know God began to see that his power was real and his love unshakable. Back in the palace, Esther stood by the window watching the celebration spread through the city. She thought of the days she had been afraid, of the moments she had nearly given up. "Lord," she whispered, "you gave me courage when I had none." Mordecai entered quietly and smiled. "Your faith saved us," he said. Esther shook her head gently. "It was God, always God." The two looked out over the city, glowing with lanterns and laughter. They knew the story of their people would never be forgotten. To honor all God had done, Mordecai wrote a message to every province. Each year, celebrate these days with joy and thanksgiving. Let them be a time of gladness when sorrow was turned to victory. The people called it the Feast of Purim, a day to remember how God used a brave queen to rescue his people. Laughter filled the streets once again. Drums echoed. Children danced in circles as parents told them the story of Esther, the girl who trusted God when everything seemed lost. As night fell, Esther returned to her chamber and looked up at the stars. She held her crown close, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, for turning fear into faith." The music of celebration drifted through her window. She smiled, knowing her courage had changed history. Her story would remind generations that God's plan is never late, and that he can use even one heart to bring hope to many. The camera slowly pulls away from the glowing palace, rising toward the starlit sky where the whisper of faith lingers. With God, courage can change the world. The morning after the decree, the streets of Persia came alive with songs of joy. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the smell of sweet bread filled the air. Children ran through the alleys laughing, waving colorful ribbons high above their heads. Everywhere, voices lifted in praise. The people who had once been afraid now walked with courage. "Look what God has done," they shouted. In the palace courtyard, Esther watched the laughter below and felt her heart swell. She had seen fear turn into freedom, and she knew that God had written a miracle across her land. In every home, candles were lit, and families gathered to remember. Mothers told their children how God had saved them through the courage of one young queen. Fathers bowed their heads and prayed words of thanksgiving. "God was with us," they said. "Even when we could not see him, he never left." The sound of laughter and song rose together like a joyful melody that reached the heavens. It was a day of peace, a day no one would ever forget. In the palace gardens, Mordecai walked among blooming flowers. Birds sang in the trees, and the fountains sparkled in the sun. He stopped to look toward the sky. "Lord," he whispered, "you lift the humble and bring justice to the faithful." Esther joined him, her eyes shining with peace. "You were right, Mordecai," she said. "God placed me here for this time." Mordecai smiled kindly. "And you were brave enough to say yes." They stood together, surrounded by light and color. Two servants of God whose faith had changed a kingdom. As the day faded, Music filled the air again. Drums echoed, flutes sang, and children danced in circles under the lantern light. Esther joined them, laughing freely for the first time in many months. "We will remember this forever," someone said. "We will teach our children that God's love never fails." The camera follows the joyful crowd as they lift candles high, the glow spreading like a wave of light. It was more than a celebration. It was worship, a living song of gratitude to the God who saves. When the music quieted, Esther stepped onto the balcony and looked out one last time. The stars shimmered over the peaceful city, and her heart felt full. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for turning fear into courage, sorrow into joy, and weakness into strength." Below, the people lifted candles toward the sky, their faces glowing with faith. The story of Esther would live on forever, a story of bravery born from trust in God. And as the stars twinkled over Persia, one truth shone brightest of all: with God, even the quietest heart can change the world. Many years passed, and the land of Persia remained at peace. The people lived without fear, their hearts full of faith and hope. Every year, they gathered to celebrate the days of Purim, the days God turned sorrow into joy. Children wore bright clothes and sang songs about Esther, the queen who trusted God. In the palace gardens, the flowers still bloomed where Esther once prayed for courage. The wind carried laughter through the courtyards as families remembered how one brave woman changed everything. Inside the palace, Mordecai grew old, but his eyes still sparkled with faith. He sat beside Esther, now a wise and gentle queen, beloved by all. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. Esther smiled softly. "I was so afraid, but God was already there." Mordecai nodded. He always is. Even when we can't see him, he's writing the story." Esther took his hand and whispered, "Then I will never stop trusting his plan." Outside, the sound of joyful drums echoed, a song of generations who remembered God's faithfulness. Far beyond the palace, the story of Esther spread across kingdoms. Travelers spoke of the queen who had risked her life to save her people. Mothers told her story by firelight, and little girls listened with wide eyes. "God gave Esther courage," they whispered, "and he can give it to us too." Across deserts and seas, her name became a symbol of faith, proof that God can use anyone, anywhere, to bring light where darkness once lived. As the camera returns to the city of Susa, the celebration of Purim fills the streets once again. Laughter echoes, drums beat, and the sound of prayer rises like music to heaven. Lanterns float into the sky one by one, glowing softly like stars. In every home, someone tells the same truth. When we are afraid, God gives us courage. When we are silent, he gives us words. And when we feel small, he reminds us we are never alone. The joy of the people becomes a living testimony that faith can overcome fear. At last, the story closes with Esther standing once more on her balcony, gazing at the horizon. The golden light of dawn washes over her face. She smiles gently and says, "Lord, may your people always remember that courage comes from you." The camera pans outward, the city, the palace, and the mountains glowing in morning light. Her voice echoes softly. Even one act of faith can change history. As the sun rises, the screen fades to white, and the words appear. The story of Esther. A story of faith, courage, and the power of God's plan.